An immortal mercenary crashes into a galaxy that worships death itself. The sky screams with prayers to gods he'll never kneel for, and every world is a graveyard waiting to be filled. Here, even the unkillable are expendable. But what happens when the one thing this universe can't break refuses to bow? The void screamed, not metaphorically, not in the silent way of vacuum death, but with actual sound that defied physical law and scraped against the inside of reality itself. The segmentum obscurus had seen 10,000 years of horrors spill through the cracks of the Imperium's bleeding borders, but what tore through the warpwake above Gehenna's crown was something new, something wrong. The augur arrays aboard the rogue trader vessel Gilded Mandate shrieked their machine spirit warnings 3 full seconds before the anomaly breached real space, and by then it was far too late to do anything but witness. The breach was not a standard warp translation. No Geller field collapse, no demon tide pouring through a rupture in the Empyrean's skin. Instead, a singularity of pure kinetic violence punched through the membrane between dimensions like a fist through wet parchment, trailing fire that burned in colors the human eye had no names for. The shockwave alone killed 218 souls aboard the orbital docks, their bodies flash-frozen and shattered by the impossible cold that followed the impossible heat. Debris spread in a perfect spherical pattern, mathematical in its destruction, indifferent to prayer or fate. At the epicenter, tumbling through hard vacuum with a bottle in one hand and his other middle finger raised toward the galaxy at large, was Lobo. He was 7 feet of muscle wrapped in tattered black leather and spiked chains, his skin chalk white and marked with scars that formed their own grotesque language of violence. Red eyes blazed beneath a shock of black hair streaked with bone white, and his grin was a slash of too many teeth, each one filed to a point. The bottle in his hand was nearly empty, some luminous liquid sloshing within, and as he spun through the debris field, he took another long pull before hurling it at a passing servitor drone. The impact vaporized the drone and sent shrapnel carving through an automated cargo hauler 300 meters distant. Lobo laughed. The sound somehow carried through vacuum, a violation of physics that would have sent Mechanicus tech priests into paroxysms of doctrinal confusion. Below him, Gehenna's crown turned in its slow orbit, a forge world stripped bare by 3 centuries of over-extraction and turned into a bounty hunter's paradise. Every criminal, pirate, and excommunicate within 10 systems eventually washed up on Gehenna's crown, either hunting or being hunted. The world's surface was a patchwork of ruined hive cities, lawless sprawls, and fighting pits where blood was currency and death was entertainment. The Imperium maintained a token garrison and allowed the Adeptus Arbites to operate 2 precinct fortresses, but everyone understood the truth. Gehenna's crown belonged to whoever could hold it, minute by minute, and the Imperium simply monitored the chaos and occasionally swept through to claim valuable targets. Lobo's trajectory carried him toward the largest settlement, a sprawl called Carrion's Gate that stretched across 300 kilometers of toxic wasteland. He made no attempt to arrest his descent, no thrusters fired, no grav chute deployed. He simply angled his body and dropped toward atmosphere like a missile, arms spread wide, still grinning. The atmospheric entry should have killed him. Temperatures exceeded 12,000 degrees within the first 3 seconds. His leathers ignited, then his skin, then the muscle beneath. Lobo burned like a falling star, trailing plasma and smoke, his skeleton briefly visible through the conflagration. He hit terminal velocity and kept accelerating. The sonic boom shattered windows across 6 districts and sent a pressure wave rolling through Carrion's Gate that knocked 3,000 people off their feet. He impacted in the center of the flesh market, a sprawling bazaar where bodies were bought and sold in every conceivable configuration. The crater was 17 meters wide and glowing cherry red, dust and debris fountained upward in a mushroom cloud. Stall keepers dove for cover, guards raised weapons, mutants scattered, and from the smoking pit, Lobo stood up. His flesh regrew in seconds, muscle knitting over bone, skin sealing over muscle, leathers reforming from ash and memory. He cracked his neck, rolled his shoulders, and spat a glob of molten metal that had been a tooth 3 seconds prior. The tooth regrew instantly. "Now that's what I call an entrance," he said, his voice a gravel rough snarl that carried across the suddenly silent market. "Who's in charge around here?" "I got business to conduct." The answer came in the form of Lasfire. 30 armed enforcers, mercenaries in the employ of the market's controlling cartel, opened up from elevated positions with lasguns and stub automatics. The las beams converged on Lobo's center mass, each one capable of boring through ceramite plate. The stub rounds followed half a second later, heavy caliber slugs designed to stop charging orcs. The combined firepower carved Lobo into ribbons, his torso exploding in a spray of blood and shredded tissue. He staggered backward 2 steps. Then he laughed, and the laughter built into a roar as his body regenerated faster than they could destroy it. Holes sealed. Organs regrew. Bones fused. He reached down and pulled a fragment of his own rib from the ground, examined it with casual interest, then flicked it like a throwing knife. The bone shard crossed 80 meters in a tenth of a second and punched through an enforcer's eye socket, the kinetic transfer liquefying the brain inside the skull. Lobo surged forward, and the market became an abattoir. His movements were not elegant. There was no martial artistry, no studied technique. He simply moved with the efficiency of a predator that had killed so many times that violence was reflex, coded into muscle memory across 1 billion deaths and rebirths. He grabbed the nearest enforcer by the head and used the man's own body as a club, swinging him in a wide arc that swept 3 more off their feet. Bones shattered. Organs ruptured. Lobo hurled the corpse at a gantry, and the impact brought the entire structure down in a crash of metal and screaming. Lasfire continued to pour into him from every angle. He ignored it. A heavy bolter opened up from a rooftop position, and the mass-reactive rounds punched through his chest cavity in explosive sequence, each detonation gutting him from within. Lobo looked down at the fist-sized exit wounds, watched his lungs regenerate, and grinned wider. Finally, something with a little kick. He bent down, grabbed a piece of twisted rebar from the crater's edge, and hurled it with strength that defied human physiology. The makeshift javelin crossed 300 meters and impacted the heavy bolter position with the force of an anti-tank round. The weapon, the gunner, and half the building disappeared in a spray of pulverized rockcrete. The enforcers broke. Some ran, others kept firing out of sheer terror, unable to process what they were witnessing. Lobo waded through them like a man walking through tall grass, each movement casual and devastating. He caught one fleeing mercenary by the ankle, swung him overhead, and brought him down on another with enough force to shatter both spines. He grabbed a woman raising a plasma pistol and head-butted her so hard her skull compressed into her chest cavity. The screaming had become white noise. Lobo stopped in the center of the carnage, blood dripping from every surface of his body, and looked around at the market's terrified survivors. He pointed at a vendor cowering behind an overturned stall. I'm looking for work. Who's got the best bounties on this rock?" The vendor, a cybernetically enhanced human with 3 mechanical arms and a face more scar tissue than skin, stared at him in abject horror. One trembling mechanical hand pointed toward the Eastern District. "The Gilded Compact," the vendor managed. "Rogue trader, Ysandra Kelt. She's in port. The Spire, top level. Please don't." Lobo was already walking, leaving a trail of bloody bootprints across the shattered market. Behind him, the crater continued to glow, and the dead continued not moving, because unlike him, they stayed that way. The city swallowed him quickly, its narrow streets and towering hab blocks forming a labyrinth of rust and desperation. Carrion's Gate had been built on the bones of something older, some first founding settlement now buried under millennia of decay. The current inhabitants simply piled new structures atop the old, creating layers of civilization that descended into darkness. The air was thick with industrial runoff, and the smell of unwashed bodies pressed too close together. Servitors trudged through the streets on eternal errands, their lobotomized brains unable to register the newcomer. Mutants watched from shadows, their twisted forms shrinking back as Lobo passed. He walked with the confidence of a man who had never been afraid of anything in his entire existence, because he hadn't. Fear required the possibility of loss, and Lobo could lose nothing that mattered. Death? He'd died more times than most people drew breath. Pain? Pain was just sensation. Defeat? You couldn't defeat something that simply got back up and kept coming. The spire dominated Carrion's Gate's skyline, a needle of corroded metal and flickering lights that punched through the toxic cloud layer. It had been an administratum tower once, back when the Imperium had pretended to govern this world with anything resembling order. Now it served as neutral ground for the major players, a place where deals were made and wars were brokered. Lobo approached the main entrance, where 4 guards in carapace armor and armed with hellguns stood watch. They saw him coming. They saw the blood. They raised their weapons. "Turn around," one said, his voice amplified through his helmet's vox grill. "The spire is closed too." Lobo grabbed the man's hellgun barrel and crushed it flat with his bare hand. The guard stared at his ruined weapon in incomprehension. Lobo punched him once, the impact caving in the carapace breastplate and pulverizing everything behind it. The guard flew backward through the entrance's armored door, which buckled and tore free of its hinges. The other 3 guards opened fire. The hellgun-lass beams were more powerful than standard infantry weapons, designed to punch through light vehicle armor. They cut Lobo in half at the waist. His upper body hit the ground, intestines spilling across the entrance platform. His lower body stood there for a moment before toppling over. Lobo propped himself up on his elbows and looked at the guards. That was rude. His body began reconnecting, muscle fibers reaching across the gap like searching fingers, organs reforming and pulling his bisected halves back together. The guards backed away, their training crumbling against the evidence of their eyes. One dropped his weapon and ran. The other 2 kept firing until Lobo was whole again and standing before them, brushing dust off his reforming leathers. He grabbed them both by their helmets and slammed their heads together with such force that the helmets fused. Their skulls inside liquefied instantly. Lobo dropped the bodies and stepped through the ruined entrance. The spire's interior was a monument to faded glory. Marble floors cracked and stained, statuary depicting imperial saints now missing limbs or heads. Light strips flickering in stuttering patterns that suggested the machine spirits within had gone half mad from neglect. A grand staircase spiraled upward through the structure's core, but Lobo ignored it. He grabbed the elevator cage and simply tore the door off, then looked at the cables running up through the shaft. "Top floor," he muttered, and jumped. His hands closed around the main cable. He began climbing, hand over hand, moving with mechanical efficiency. The cable groaned under his weight. Below, alarms began shrieking as security systems belatedly registered the intrusion. Above, he could hear movement, shouting, the distinctive whine of weapon capacitors charging. Lobo smiled. He emerged onto the top floor through the elevator shaft's ceiling, simply punching through the metal plating and pulling himself up into a corridor of dark wood and gold filigree. 20 armed guards stood waiting, a mix of private security and what looked like ex-Imperial Guard, their weapons trained on the hole he'd just created. At the corridor's far end, massive doors stood open to reveal an audience chamber beyond. "Stop right there," one guard shouted. "You are trespassing on the sovereign territory of rogue trader Ysandra Kelt. Surrender, or..." Lobo drew a weapon. It appeared in his hand from nowhere, pulled from some extra-dimensional pocket that defied explanation, a massive hand cannon that looked like it had been welded together from starship parts and bad dreams. The barrel was easily 20 millimeters wide, and when Lobo pulled the trigger, the sound was apocalyptic. The round wasn't explosive, it was solid shot, a thumb-sized slug of super-dense metal accelerated to velocities that made a mockery of physics. It punched through the first guard's chest, continued through the guard behind him, and 3 more after that, before burying itself in the corridor's far wall with enough force to crack the structural support. The shockwave alone knocked half the remaining guards off their feet. Lobo fired twice more in rapid succession. Each round carved a line of destruction through flesh and armor and wall, the kinetic transfer turning human bodies into pink mist. The survivors broke ranks and ran, their discipline shattered. Lobo let them go. He wasn't here for them. He walked down the corridor, his boots heavy on the ornate floor, gun still smoking in his hand. The audience chamber beyond was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows, its walls lined with trophies from 1,000 worlds. Alien skulls, Xenos weaponry, battle standards from defeated enemies. At the chamber's center, seated on a throne of carved blackwood and surrounded by advisors and bodyguards, was rogue trader Wissandra Kelt. She was tall, her body enhanced with subtle augmetics that gave her movements an unnatural grace. Her face was sharp and aristocratic, framed by silver hair bound in complex braids threaded with data cables. She wore robes of deep crimson trimmed in gold, and her eyes were augmetic, glowing with soft amber light as they focused on Lobo. She did not stand. She did not flee. She simply watched him approach with an expression of calculated interest. Her bodyguards moved to intercept. 6 warriors in ornate powered armor, each one a veteran of countless void battles and ground campaigns, armed with master-crafted weapons and bound by oath to die for their mistress. They formed a wall between Lobo and the throne. "That's far enough, scum," one growled, raising a power sword that crackled with blue energy. Lobo looked at the 6 warriors, then passed them to Wissandra. "You the boss?" he asked. "I am rogue trader Wissandra Kelt," she replied, her voice cultured and sharp, holder of a warrant of trade signed by the God Emperor himself, mistress of 3 void-capable vessels and 17 commercial ventures across 5 systems. "And you are an intruder who has killed 14 of my employees in the last 2 minutes. Explain yourself, or die where you stand." Lobo holstered his weapon with a casual movement. "I'm here for work. Heard you run the best bounty board in this sector. Got a list of people who need killing, and I'm the guy who does the killing. Simple business proposition." Yssandra's augmetic eyes adjusted their focus, analyzing him with sensors that could detect everything from pheromone production to heart rate. What they found made her pause. His physiological readings were impossible. His heart beat with the force of a piston engine. His blood pressure should have ruptured every vessel in his body. His cellular activity suggested regeneration occurring at speeds that violated every known principle of biology. "What are you?" she asked quietly. "I'm Lobo," he said, as if that explained everything. "The main man, the bow. Intergalactic bounty hunter, assassin for hire, and all-around bastich extraordinaire. Now, we gonna do business? Or am I gonna have to get creative with how I convince ya?" One of the bodyguards moved, power sword swinging in a killing arc toward Lobo's neck. The blade was a masterwork, capable of slicing through tank armor. Lobo caught it with his bare hand. The energy field screamed, chewing into his palm, vaporizing flesh and boiling blood. Lobo ignored it, yanked the sword from the bodyguard's grip, and drove it point first through the warrior's eye slit. The blade punched through reinforced ceramite, through bone, through brain, and out the back of the helmet. The bodyguard dropped. Lobo's hand regenerated in seconds, new flesh flowing over exposed bone. The remaining 5 bodyguards attacked as one, their movements coordinated through micro-bead communication, power weapons, bolt pistols, a melter charge thrown in close proximity. The combined assault would have overwhelmed a space marine. They hit Lobo simultaneously from multiple angles, cutting, burning, shooting, and the force of it drove him backward 3 steps. His left arm came off at the shoulder, severed by a power axe. His right leg exploded as a bolt round detonated inside the thigh. The melter charge hit his chest and superheated his torso to near liquid, the thermal bloom so intense that it melted the floor beneath him. Lobo spat blood, looked down at his ruined body, and laughed. His arm regrew in a spray of bone and muscle, snapping back into place with an audible crack. His leg reformed around the embedded bolter shrapnel, simply incorporating the fragments into new tissue and then expelling them like splinters. His chest cooled and solidified, the blackened carbon sloughing off to reveal new skin beneath. In 6 seconds, he was whole. "My turn," he said. He moved. Not with the enhanced speed of an Astartes, which was controlled and purposeful, but with the wild momentum of a vehicle without brakes. He grabbed the nearest bodyguard and used him as a battering ram, charging into the others. Armor crumpled. Bones snapped. Lobo drove his improvised weapon into a wall with such force that both the bodyguard and the wall gave way. He turned, grabbed another by the ankle, and swung him in a circle. The centrifugal force was tremendous. The bodyguard's leg ripped free at the hip. Lobo kept swinging the separated limb like a club, using it to beat two more bodyguards into twitching heaps of broken ceramite and pulped flesh. The last bodyguard activated a personal teleporter, a rare and valuable piece of archaeotech. Golden light enveloped him. The teleport sequence began. Lobo grabbed him mid-transition. The competing forces should have torn them both apart on a molecular level. Instead, Lobo simply held on as the teleporter tried to drag them both through the immaterium. There was a sound like reality tearing, a flash of impossible color, and then they were both still standing in the chamber, the teleporter smoking and ruined, its machine spirit shrieking in binary death throes. Lobo ripped the teleporter pack off the bodyguard's back and crushed it in his fist. Then he grabbed the bodyguard's helmet in both hands and twisted. The neck guard gave way with a metallic shriek. The head inside turned 360 degrees. Lobo dropped the body and turned toward the throne. Ysandra had not moved. Her advisors had fled. Her throne room was empty save for corpses and herself. She regarded Lobo with the same calculating expression, though now there was something else in her augmetic gaze. Recognition, perhaps, or opportunity. "You're not from this galaxy," she said. It wasn't a question. "Nope. Got lost on the way to a job. Don't matter. Galaxy's a galaxy. People need killin' everywhere. And I ain't particular about the local politics. You killed 14 of my people. You destroyed a significant amount of expensive equipment. You've created a diplomatic incident that will require considerable resources to resolve." She paused. "But you also dispatched 6 of the finest warriors in my employ in under a minute, and you appear to be functionally immortal. Ain't no appear about it, lady. I'm the real deal. Can't be killed, can't be stopped, can't be bought off unless the money's good enough. Which brings me back to my original point. You got bounties? I take 'em. Simple as that." Ysandra was silent for a long moment. Her fingers drummed against the throne's armrest, a gesture that suggested rapid calculation. The Imperium had protocols for everything, but nothing for this. An immortal mercenary of unknown origin with no loyalty to anything but profit. In anyone else's hands, he would be a catastrophe. In hers, properly directed, he could be the most valuable asset in the sector. She made her decision. "I do have work," she said carefully. "High-value targets. Individuals whose removal would benefit my commercial interests and, incidentally, serve the Imperium's strategic goals. However, I require proof of your capabilities beyond simple slaughter. Anyone can kill. I need precision, reliability, results." Lobo grinned, the expression splitting his face like a wound. "Give me a name. I'll bring you their head. Hell, I'll bring you their whole body if that's easier. Just point me in the right direction and tell me what the job pays." Ysandra stood, her robes settling around her with a whisper of expensive fabric. She descended from the throne, her augmetic eyes never leaving Lobo's face. She moved to a hollow projector set into the chamber floor and activated it with a gesture. Light bloomed upward, resolving into the image of a massive orc warboss, his body a mountain of green muscle and crude bionics. "Warboss Grimtooth," Ysandra said. "He controls the southern wastelands and has been raiding my mining operations for 3 months. Standard bounty is 500,000 thrones. I'll double it if you bring me his head within 72 hours. Lobo studied the projection, taking in the orc's size, the crude weapons, the armor plates bolted directly into his flesh. Big green guy, talks funny, likes fightin', got it. He looked at Ysandra. 1 million thrones, cash, soon as I deliver, and I want access to whatever arsenal you got. Gonna need to restock. Agreed. My seneschal will provide you with coordinates and a full tactical briefing. Don't need a briefing, just need to know where he is. Lobo turned toward the chamber's exit, then stopped. Oh, and lady, next time you set bodyguards on me, make sure they're actually worth the effort. These guys were practice. He walked out, leaving Ysandra alone with her thoughts and her dead. She watched him go, and despite everything, a small smile touched her lips. She had seen the Astartes. She had traded with Xenos. She had witnessed the power of the warp and the fury of the Mechanicus, but this was something new, something unbound by the galaxy's established rules. She would use him, of course. That was what rogue traders did. They found valuable things and made them profitable, and if using Lobo required a certain moral flexibility, well, she had never pretended to be a saint. But even as she made these calculations, a small part of her wondered if she had just made a deal with something more dangerous than anything the galaxy had yet produced. The thought didn't trouble her as much as it should have. Lobo acquired his transportation through the simple expedient of stealing the first vehicle he saw that looked fast enough. It was a heavily modified cargo hauler with an engine that sounded like an angry god and armor plating welded across every surface. The owner had been standing beside it, conducting some kind of black market transaction. The owner was now decorating the pavement 30 meters away, having discovered the hard way that arguing with Lobo was inadvisable. The hauler's machine spirit shrieked in binary protest as Lobo ripped out the ignition lock and hot-wired the engine with his bare hands. The dashboard exploded in a shower of sparks. The engine roared. Lobo slammed his foot down on the accelerator, and the hauler lurched forward, scattering pedestrians and smashing through 2 merchant stalls before finding clear road. Gehenna's crowned southern wastelands lay 200 kilometers beyond Carrion's gate's outer walls. The journey would take most vehicles 4 hours across terrain deliberately left broken and unmaintained to slow any attacking force. Lobo made it in 45 minutes, pushing the hauler past every mechanical limit until the engine began to glow cherry red and the transmission screamed in mechanical agony. He drove through toxic swamps that dissolved the hauler's undercarriage, across radioactive flats where the sand itself was glass, and over the shattered remnants of battlefields so old that the bones had turned to stone. The Orc encampment sprawled across a valley between 2 dead volcanoes, a chaotic sprawl of scrap metal fortifications and crude structures that seemed to grow organically from the desert itself. Lobo could see Orcs moving through the camp, their green forms instantly recognizable even at distance. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The numbers didn't concern him. He aimed the hauler directly at the camp center and jumped clear. The vehicle continued forward on momentum alone, engine screaming, pistons hammering in their death throes. It crashed through the first barricade in an explosion of twisted metal and confused Orcs. It plowed through 3 crude buildings, scattering greenskins in every direction. It hit what looked like an ammunition dump and detonated in a fireball that rose 300 meters into the toxic sky. The explosion killed 47 Orcs instantly and wounded 3 times that number. It also got everyone's attention. Lobo walked into the camp through the hole the hauler had created, cracking his knuckles, grinning like a maniac. The Orcs saw him. They didn't immediately attack. Orcs were simple creatures, but they recognized a fighter when they saw one, and something about the pale figure walking calmly through the flames and carnage gave them pause. That pause lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then they charged. Orcs loved nothing more than a good fight, and this weird Humy thing walking into their camp was the best invitation they'd had all week. They came in a green tide, bellowing their primitive war cries, waving choppers and sluggers, and whatever else they could get their meaty hands on. There was no coordination, no tactics, just pure aggressive enthusiasm. Lobo met them head-on. The first Orc to reach him was a boy, 7 feet of muscle and bad intentions swinging a chopper that could have bisected a horse. Lobo caught the blade in mid-swing, yanked it from the Orc's grip, and buried it in the greenskin's skull with enough force to split the head down to the sternum. The Orc stood there for a moment, its primitive brain not yet registering death, before toppling backward. 2 more came from either side, coordinating their attack with the simple cunning of predators. Lobo grabbed them both by their throats, lifted them off the ground, and slammed them together so hard their skulls fused on impact. He hurled the joined bodies at another cluster of charging Orcs, the improvised projectile bowling them over like pins. A slugger round caught him in the chest, then another, and another. The crude bullets lacked the penetration of proper Imperial munitions, but what they lacked in sophistication they made up for in quantity. Dozens of orcs were firing now, their weapons creating a storm of lead that chewed into Lobo from every angle. He staggered, but didn't fall. Blood poured from 100 holes. He could feel his lungs puncturing, his heart perforated, his organs turning to Swiss cheese. He spat blood and kept walking, his body regenerating even as new bullets carved fresh wounds. An orc nub, bigger and meaner than the boys, charged with a power claw crackling with energy. The weapon was massive, a crude fusion of orc engineering and barely understood technology, capable of tearing through tank armor. It closed around Lobo's torso and squeezed. Ribs shattered, his spine compressed. The knob roared in triumph. Lobo headbutted the knob with such force that the greenskin's skull caved in like rotten fruit. The power claw went slack. Lobo pried it open, his ribs already reforming, and ripped it off the knob's arm. He then beat the knob to death with its own severed limb, each impact pulverizing more of the creature's body until there was nothing left but green paste. The battle became a tornado of violence. Lobo waded through the orcs like a force of nature, each movement economical and devastating. He grabbed weapons from dead greenskins and used them until they broke, then grabbed new ones. He threw bodies like projectiles. He used the environment itself as a weapon, slamming orcs into jagged metal, impaling them on broken beams, crushing them under overturned vehicles. The orcs loved it. This was the kind of fight they lived for. A proper scrap with an enemy who didn't die easy and hit back hard. They poured in from every direction, their numbers seemingly endless. For every 10 Lobo killed, 20 more appeared. The ground became slick with blood and spilled fungal matter. The air filled with the stench of cordite and orc biology. Lobo pulled his hand cannon and started firing into the mass. Each shot was a small apocalypse, the massive rounds punching through multiple orcs before burying themselves in whatever structure happened to be behind them. Buildings collapsed. Crude war machines exploded. The very landscape reshaped itself under the sustained assault. And then Warboss Grimtooth arrived. The Warboss was enormous even by orc standards, easily 12 feet tall and massing as much as a small vehicle. His body was a patchwork of muscle, crude bionics, and armor plates bolted directly into his flesh. One arm ended in a power claw the size of a combat bike. The other held a massive shooter customized with so many additional barrels that it looked like an organ made of guns. His head was a battered slab of bone and scar tissue, his jaw augmented with metal teeth that could bite through steel. He saw Lobo standing in a circle of orc corpses and laughed, the sound like an avalanche. "You da one making all this racket?" Grimtooth bellowed. "Good, been boring round here lately. Time for a proper scrap." Lobo looked up at the massive warboss and smiled. "You must be the boss. Good. Means I only gotta kill you once to get paid." "Grimtooth!" Grimtooth roared and charged. The impact when they met was seismic. Grimtooth's power claw snapped shut around Lobo's entire upper body. The energy field screamed, bones broke, flesh charred. Lobo brought both fists down on the warboss's head in a hammer blow that would have killed a tank. Grimtooth's skull rang like a bell, but the greenskin just laughed and squeezed harder. Lobo's spine cracked, his ribs turned to powder, his internal organs were compressed into paste. The power claw's energy field was cooking him from the inside, vaporizing tissue faster than even he could regenerate. He reached up with both hands, grabbed the power claw's mechanical joints, and pulled. The servo screamed. Metal groaned. Grimtooth's eyes widened in surprise as the Humy thing in his grip demonstrated strength that shouldn't be possible from something that size. Lobo pulled harder. The power claw began to buckle. Grimtooth released him and brought his other arm around, the massive shooter opening up at point-blank range. The weapon fired on full automatic, hundreds of rounds per second pouring into Lobo's body. The impacts tore him apart, literally. His left arm separated at the shoulder, his right leg disintegrated below the knee. Half his head disappeared in a spray of bone and brain matter. His body hit the ground in pieces. The orcs watching howled in approval. The warboss had won. The fight was over. Then Lobo's pieces started moving. His severed arm crawled across the ground like a pale spider. His separated leg kicked and twitched. His partial head opened its remaining eye, and from the torn wreckage of his torso, new tissue began sprouting with obscene speed. Within seconds, he was reforming. Within 10 seconds, he was whole. Within 15, he was standing. "That all you got?" Lobo asked. The silence that followed was total. Even orcs, with their simple understanding of the universe, recognized when something was wrong. Enemies didn't come back from that. Couldn't. It violated every law they understood about how fighting worked. Grimtooth stared, his crude brain struggling to process what he was witnessing. Then his confusion transformed into pure joy. "Used the best scrap I ever had," the warboss roared. "Let's go again." They went again. The fight that followed turned the orc camp into a crater. Grimtooth was an unstoppable force, his strength multiplied by crude bionics and decades of brutal warfare. Lobo was an immovable object, unable to be killed and too stubborn to surrender. They tore into each other with absolute commitment, each blow carrying enough force to shatter stone. Grimtooth's power claw caught Lobo around the waist and tore him in half. Lobo's upper body latched onto the warboss's face and started clawing at his eyes. Grimtooth slammed him into the ground repeatedly until the earth fractured. Lobo regenerated and came back swinging, his fists pulverizing bionics and green flesh with equal enthusiasm. The watching orcs had stopped fighting among themselves. They simply stood in a vast circle, witnessing their warboss battle this impossible enemy. Some cheered for Grimtooth, others, caught up in the primal excitement, found themselves cheering for the pale, humy thing that refused to die. The fight raged for 20 minutes, then 30, then an hour. Both combatants were slowing now, not from injury, but from simple exhaustion. Grimtooth's bionics were failing, servos burned out from constant strain. Lobo's regeneration was still perfect, but even he had limits to how much trauma he could endure without pause. They separated, both breathing hard, both covered in each other's blood. "You's pretty good," Grimtooth admitted, his massive chest heaving. "For a humy." "Yeah. Well, you ain't bad yourself," Lobo replied. "For a big green idiot who talks like he's got rocks for brains." "One more go?" Grimtooth asked hopefully. Lobo considered this. Then he drew his hand cannon, aimed, and fired. The round caught Grimtooth in the center of his face, punching through the reinforced skull and liquefying the brain cavity beyond. The warboss's body remained standing for a moment, held upright by locked bionics and dead muscle. Then he toppled backward like a felled tree, his massive weight shaking the ground. The watching orcs stared in stunned silence. Lobo walked over to the corpse, pulled out a vibroblade he'd looted from somewhere, and methodically sawed through Grimtooth's thick neck. It took 2 minutes of sustained effort. When he finally severed the head, he lifted it by one of the metal implants jutting from the skull and looked around at the assembled orcs. "Anyone else want to try their luck?" he asked. The orcs looked at each other. Then, as one, they began to laugh. Not the mocking laughter of victors, but the genuine appreciation of warriors who had witnessed a proper fight. Some began to chant Lobo's name, or their crude approximation of it. Others simply nodded in respect. A smaller orc, likely one of Grimtooth's former lieutenants, stepped forward. "You killed the boss," the orc stated. "That means you's the boss now. By orc law." Lobo blinked. This was not what he'd expected. "I ain't your boss. I just wanted his head. Don't matter. You won. You da boss. We fight for you now. I don't want you fighting for me. I work alone." The orc looked confused. This was clearly outside his understanding of how leadership worked. "You fought for position. You won. You were in charge." Simple, Lobo sighed. This was getting complicated. "Look," he said slowly, "I appreciate the offer and all, but I got my own thing going. You want to fight? Fight each other. Pick a new boss. I don't care. Just stay out of my way, and we won't have problems. Got it?" The orc delegation conferred among themselves in their guttural language. Finally, they seemed to reach a consensus. The spokesman turned back to Lobo. "We respect that. You wanna be lone wolf? That's orky. But you either change your mind, you come back. We fight Witcher. Oi? Yeah, sure, whatever. Oh. Lobo turned and began walking out of the camp, Grimtove's head dangling from one hand. Behind him, the orcs had already begun the process of selecting a new warboss, which involved a lot of shouting and hitting each other with various implements. Lobo left them to it. He had a delivery to make. The walk back to Carrion's Gate took 6 hours. Lobo didn't hurry. He enjoyed the quiet, the toxic landscape, the simplicity of putting one foot in front of the other. The head had stopped bleeding after the first hour, the crude orc biology finally accepting death. It was getting heavy, but that was fine. Heavy meant valuable. Valuable meant paid. He was halfway across the radioactive flats when the ambush hit. They came from underground, erupting from hidden tunnels in a spray of sand and coordinated lasfire. 20 soldiers in black carapace armor, their weapons modified with silencers and specialized optics, not orcs, not pirates, professional military, moving with the kind of discipline that suggested Imperial Guard training or better. The first volley caught Lobo in a crossfire pattern, las beams converging from multiple angles. His chest exploded. His head snapped back, the back of his skull vaporized. He dropped to his knees, Grimtove's head rolling from his grip. The soldiers advanced in 2-man fire teams, maintaining overlapping fields of fire, their movements textbook perfect. They poured concentrated lasfire into Lobo's kneeling form, reducing him to a smoking wreck of charred flesh and exposed bone. Then they made their mistake. They stopped shooting. The squad leader raised a hand, calling for ceasefire. He approached Lobo's ruined corpse cautiously, weapon still trained on the target. The body was a burned mess, barely recognizable as human. No one could survive that much sustained fire. The target was down. Mission accomplished. Lobo's regeneration kicked in with a vengeance. Flesh sprouted from charred bone like fast-growing fungus. Organs reformed in seconds. Skin sealed over muscle. His head reconstructed itself, eye sockets filling with new tissue, brain matter reconstituting from burnt fragments. In less than 10 seconds, he was whole again and rising to his feet. The squad leader's face behind his helmet visor went pale. "Open fire," he screamed. "Open fire now." But Lobo was already moving, and this time he was angry. He crossed the distance to the nearest soldier in 3 strides, grabbed the man's lasgun, and ripped it from his grip. He then used the weapon as a club, swinging it in a wide arc that caught another soldier in the head and sent him flying. The lasgun broke on the second impact. Lobo discarded it and grabbed the nearest soldier bodily, lifting the armored figure overhead. He threw the soldier at another fire team, the impact bowling them over. He grabbed another, tore off the soldier's helmet, and headbutted him with such force that the man's face collapsed inward. Lasfire continued to pour into him from every direction, but now he was in close quarters, moving among them, using their own bodies as shields. One soldier drew a monomolecular combat knife and tried to stab Lobo in the kidney. The blade was extraordinary, capable of cutting through ceramite armor at the molecular level. It slid into Lobo's back like butter. Lobo reached behind himself, grabbed the soldier's arm, and pulled. The arm came off at the shoulder. Lobo beat the soldier to death with his own severed limb. The squad was professional, but they were facing something outside their training parameters. You couldn't kill what wouldn't stay dead. You couldn't outmaneuver something that felt no pain and never slowed. Their discipline began to crack as the pale figure systematically dismantled their formation with his bare hands. The squad leader activated his vox speed, requesting immediate extraction. Target is hostile. Repeat, target is hostile and has breached engagement parameters. We need. Lobo punched his hand through the squad leader's chest and ripped out his primary heart. The leader stared down at the fist-sized hole in disbelief before collapsing. Lobo dropped the heart and turned toward the remaining soldiers. There were 7 left. They had stopped firing. Their weapons hung limply in their grips as they simply stared at the blood-soaked figure advancing on them. One dropped his lasgun and ran. Another fell to his knees, either in surrender or shock. The rest stood frozen. "Who sent you?" Lobo asked, his voice casual despite the carnage. Silence. Lobo grabbed the nearest soldier by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "I asked you a question. I ain't big on repeating myself." The soldier's hands scrabbled at Lobo's grip, his feet kicking uselessly. His voice came out in strangled gasps. "Mandate, Arbeits, kill, order, excommunicate, extremis." Lobo frowned. "The hell's an excommunicate extremis?" "Highest. Threat rating. To be eliminated. On sight." "Huh. Ain't even been here a day and already I made the most wanted list. That's gotta be some kinda record." He dropped the soldier, who collapsed gasping. "Tell your bosses that if they wanna kill me, they're gonna need to send more than 20 guys. Hell, send 1,000, send 10,000, won't matter. I'll just keep coming back." He turned away, located Grimtooth's head where it had rolled during the fight, and picked it up. The remaining soldiers watched him walk away, none of them willing or able to resume the attack. Behind him, the toxic desert wind began covering the bodies with radioactive sand. Lobo made it back to Carrion's gate without further incident. The spire's guards saw him approaching and wisely opened the gates without comment. The elevator was still broken, so he climbed the cable again, Grimtooth's head gripped between his teeth. He emerged on the top floor to find Lysandra Kelt waiting, flanked by new bodyguards and looking remarkably composed for someone whose previous security detail was scattered across her audience chamber in pieces. She regarded the orc head with professional interest as Lobo dropped it at her feet. "Warboss Grimtoff," she confirmed, examining the crude bionics and distinctive scarring. "Impressive. You completed the contract in under 12 hours. I expected at least 2 days. Job's a job. Where's my money?" Lysandra gestured to a secured cargo container resting beside her throne. 1 million thrones, as agreed. However, I have a problem. As of 6 hours ago, you were declared excommunicate extremis by the local Arbeits precinct. That declaration will spread through official channels within days. Having you on my payroll has become a significant liability. Lobo grinned. "So fire me." "I have no intention of doing so. I'm simply informing you that our business relationship has become considerably more complicated. The Imperium does not look kindly on those who shelter excommunicates, and the Arbeits have already sent kill teams. I assume you encountered one? 20 guys, good gear, decent tactics. They didn't take. There will be more. The Arbeits are not known for their flexibility. Once a kill order is issued, they pursue it with mechanical determination. Let 'em come. I'll stack the bodies as high as they want to send 'em." Lysandra was quiet for a moment, her augmetic eyes studying him with an intensity that suggested heavy calculation. "I have a counter-proposal. The Arbeits operate from 2 fortress precincts on this world. If those fortresses were to be destroyed, the kill order would be delayed indefinitely while new Arbeits were dispatched from off-world. That process takes months, sometimes years. In the interim, you would be free to operate, and I would be free to employ you." Lobo understood immediately. "You want me to hit both fortresses? I want you to eliminate the Arbeits' presence on Gehenna's crown entirely. Consider it a long-term investment in our mutual business relationship. Standard bounty rates apply. 2 million thrones per fortress, paid upon confirmation of target destruction. 4 million total for knocking over some cop shops. That's decent money." Lobo scratched his chin, considering. "What's stopping me from just taking this million and leaving? Finding work somewhere else? Nothing at all. But you won't. Because you're not stupid, despite appearances. Every precinct will have orders to kill on sight. I'm offering you the chance to eliminate that threat at its source while making a considerable profit. It's simple mathematics." Lobo laughed. "Lady, I like how you think. Cold, ruthless, all about the bottom line. We're gonna get along just fine. All right, you got a deal. Point me at the first fortress. The northern precinct is located in the ruins of Old Carrion, approximately 70 kilometers from here. It's a fortified complex built into the bedrock, garrisoned by an estimated 300 Arbeits, along with supporting servitors and gun servitors. They have void shields, automated defense turrets, and access to off-world reinforcement via shuttle landing pads. You'll need equipment. Already got equipment. Lobo patted his hand cannon. You'll need heavier equipment. I'm having my seneschal prepare a weapons cache. Military-grade ordnance, anti-armor munitions, siege charges. Take what you need. Now you're talking my language. 3 hours later, Lobo departed Carrion's Gate in a commandeered heavy transport loaded with enough military hardware to level a small city. He drove north toward the ruins, his new arsenal rattling in the cargo bed, a fresh bottle of something alcoholic and probably toxic stolen from Issandra's private stores sitting open in the cup holder. The sky above was the color of old bruises, and ahead, the ruins of old Carrion rose like broken teeth against the horizon. The Arbite's fortress was not subtle. It squatted in the heart of the ruins, like a monument to order imposed through violence, a massive structure of black stone and reinforced ceramite that had survived everything Gehenna's crown could throw at it for 3 centuries. Void shields shimmered in the toxic air, creating a dome of protective energy that would stop everything short of orbital bombardment. Auto turrets tracked in slow patterns from elevated positions. The walls were studded with firing ports and sensor arrays. Lobo parked the transport 2 kilometers out and began unloading his equipment. He worked methodically, sorting through the cache with the practiced efficiency of someone who had conducted sieges across 1,000 worlds. Crack grenades, melter bombs, a shoulder-mounted missile launcher that looked like it had been stripped from a destroyed vehicle, breaching charges, a heavy flamer, and one truly magnificent piece of ordnance, a multi-melter rated for anti-tank operations, its barrel as wide as his thigh. He loaded himself down with weapons until he resembled a walking arsenal, strapped the multi-melter across his back, and started toward the fortress. The auto turrets acquired him at 1,500 meters. They were sophisticated systems, their machine spirits programmed with the collected tactical wisdom of the Adeptus Arbites. They identified the target as hostile, calculated optimal firing solutions, and opened up with synchronized heavy bolter fire. The rounds tore into Lobo in a stream of explosive devastation, each bolt detonating on impact and carving fist-sized chunks from his body. His left arm disappeared in a spray of bone and meat, his right leg buckled as bolts chewed through the thigh. His torso opened up in a dozen places, exposing ribs and organs to the toxic air. Lobo kept walking, his body regenerating as fast as the turrets could damage it. He unslung the missile launcher, aimed at the nearest turret emplacement, and fired. The missile streaked across the distance and impacted in a bloom of fire and shrapnel. The turret disappeared, replaced by a crater in the fortress wall. The other turrets adjusted their targeting parameters and increased their rate of fire. Lobo fired again and again, walking forward through the firestorm, each step carrying him closer to the walls. Missiles lanced out in rapid succession, each one finding a turret or defensive position and obliterating it. The fortress wall began to look like a giant had taken bites out of it. At 500 meters, the void shields registered his approach and activated anti-personnel protocols. Lightning arced down from the shield dome, massive bolts of controlled energy that could fry a Lehman Russ tank. The first bolt hit Lobo square in the chest and vaporized him from the waist up. His legs took 2 more steps before toppling over. His body regenerated from the legs upward, flesh and bone and organs sprouting in reverse sequence until he was whole again. He stood, retrieved his fallen weapons, and kept advancing. The Arbites inside the fortress were not unprepared. Kill teams deployed through sally ports, emerging in tight formations with weapons ready. These were not local enforcers or hired mercenaries. These were Arbites, warriors of the Adeptus Arbites, trained from youth in the art of law enforcement through overwhelming force. They wore carapace armor marked with the insignia of their precinct. They carried shotguns, combat shields, and the absolute certainty that the Emperor's justice was on their side. They opened fire with disciplined volleys, shotgun rounds and solid slugs, creating a wall of lead that would have stopped a charging orc mob. Lobo walked through it, his body jerking under each impact, holes appearing and disappearing as his regeneration worked overtime. He dropped the empty missile launcher, pulled crack grenades from his bandolier, and started throwing. The explosions carved gaps in the Arbite's formations. Bodies flew, armor crumpled. Lobo charged into the chaos, discarding ranged weapons for the simple brutality of close combat. He grabbed an Arbite by the helmet and slammed the enforcer's head into the fortress wall with enough force to crack both the helmet and the stone. He caught another's baton in mid-swing, broke the weapon over his knee, and drove both halves through the Arbite's eye slits. More Arbites poured from the fortress, their numbers seemingly endless. The kill teams worked with mechanical coordination, establishing overlapping fields of fire, using suppressing volleys to control movement, executing textbook small unit tactics. Against any normal enemy, they would have been devastating. Lobo was not normal. He broke their formations through sheer unstoppable momentum, his regeneration rendering their tactics meaningless. They shot him, he kept coming. They tried to swarm him, he threw them off. They detonated crack grenades at point-blank range, willing to sacrifice themselves to stop his advance. He regenerated from the scattered pieces and resumed walking. The main gate loomed before him, a massive slab of reinforced adamantium set into the fortress wall. It was designed to withstand siege cannons and orbital strikes. Lobo unshipped the multi-melter, braced it against his shoulder, and fired. The weapon was designed to melt through tank armor at range. At close distance, focused on a single point, it became apocalyptic. The beam of superheated energy carved into the gate like a cutting torch through butter. Metal ran molten. Stone beneath the metal turned to glass and then vapor. The fortress wall itself began to glow. Lobo held the trigger down, pouring fire into the gate in a sustained burst that would have overheated and destroyed the weapon if used by anyone else. But his strength let him brace against the recoil, and his regeneration kept him from being flash-cooked by the backwash of thermal energy. The multi-melter screamed, its machine spirit wailing in binary agony, and the gate surrendered. It didn't open. It simply ceased to exist, vaporized at the molecular level, and replaced by a 20-meter hole of molten slag. Lobo dropped the ruined multi-melter and charged through the breach. The fortress interior was a maze of corridors and defensive positions, every angle covered by overlapping fields of fire. Arbites waited in prepared positions, their shotguns and riot cannons trained on the breach. They opened fire the instant Lobo appeared, their discipline perfect. The firestorm tore him apart. His body exploded under the concentrated fire, reduced to meat and bone fragments scattered across the entryway. The Arbites maintained fire discipline, pouring rounds into the scattered remains, ensuring the target was thoroughly dead. The remains started pulling themselves back together. Individual pieces crawled across the floor, drawn together by some force the Arbites had no framework to understand. Fingers reattached to hands, hands to arms, arms to torso. The Arbites watched in growing horror as the thing they had killed regenerated before their eyes, flesh flowing like liquid, bones snapping into place, until Lobo stood whole in the center of their kill zone. "My turn," he said. The heavy flamer came off his back in one smooth motion. He pulled the trigger, and the world became fire. The Promethium jet was 20 meters long and hot enough to melt ceramite. It washed over the Arbites' positions in a wave of liquid flame, turning the defensive corridors into crematoriums. Arbites stumbled from cover, their armor melting, their bodies cooking inside their own equipment. Lobo advanced through the inferno, the heavy flamer a roaring god in his hands, burning everything in his path. The fortress defenders fell back in disorder, their discipline crumbling against an enemy that simply could not be stopped. They tried to establish new defensive lines. Lobo burned through them. They triggered emergency bulkheads, sealing corridors with blast doors. Lobo melted the doors and kept advancing. They sent servitors, mindless combat constructs programmed only to attack. Lobo burned them to ash. He reached the fortress heart, a massive command center where the precinct marshal coordinated the defense from behind armored glass. The marshal was a scarred veteran of 100 enforcement actions, his body more augmetic than flesh, his face locked in a permanent expression of grim determination. He saw Lobo approaching through the command center's security feeds and activated the final defense protocol. The corridor ahead of Lobo simply exploded. Demolition charges built into the fortress structure detonated in sequence, bringing down the ceiling, walls, and floor in a controlled collapse designed to bury attackers under tons of rubble. The explosion was tremendous, the concussive force liquefying anything caught in the blast radius. Lobo was buried under 50 tons of broken stone and twisted metal. For 30 seconds, there was silence. Dust settled. Small fires burned. The marshal watched the feeds, waiting for confirmation. The rubble shifted. A pale hand emerged, gripping the edge of a massive stone block. Then another hand. Lobo hauled himself out of the debris like a corpse clawing from a grave, his body regenerating from crushed pulp back into solid form. He stood atop the rubble pile, covered in dust and blood, and looked directly at the security camera. "Nice try," he said. The marshal's face, what little could still express emotion, showed something that might have been fear. He reached for the Vox system to call for off-world reinforcement. Lobo was already through the armored glass. He didn't bother with the door. He simply charged the reinforced transparasteel viewport and hit it with his full weight and momentum. The material was rated to withstand small arms fire and explosive decompression. It held for approximately half a second before shattering into a million fragments. Lobo and the marshal met in the center of the command center, and the fight was brief and brutal. The marshal was a warrior, enhanced with combat augmetics and decades of experience. Lobo was functionally immortal and utterly without mercy. They traded blows, the marshal's augmetic strength against Lobo's regenerative endurance, and there was never any real question of the outcome. Lobo ripped the marshal's augmetic arms off one at a time, then used them to beat the marshal to death. It took longer than it should have, because the marshal refused to die easily, his multiple hearts and reinforced skeleton keeping him alive well past the point where a normal human would have expired. But eventually, biology surrendered to trauma, and the marshal stopped moving. Lobo dropped the body and looked around the command center. Banks of cogitators hummed softly. Security feeds showed the fortress in ruins, fires burning in a dozen locations, bodies scattered everywhere. He located the main data core, a massive machine that contained the precinct's operational records, and started planting breaching charges. The charges detonated in sequence, each explosion carefully placed to maximize structural damage. The command center collapsed, then the level beneath it, then the one beneath that. The fortress began to fold in on itself, each floor pancaking onto the one below in a progressive cascade failure. Lobo walked out through the main breach as the structure fell, the roar of collapsing stone and metal following him like thunder. He didn't look back. The fortress's void shields flickered and died as their power generators were crushed. The remaining auto turrets went silent as their control systems were buried under rubble. By the time Lobo reached his transport, the fortress was a smoking crater, and every Arbite's inside was dead. He drove back to Carrion's Gate with the ruins burning on the horizon behind him. Ysandra Kelt received confirmation of the northern precinct's destruction 3 hours later through her network of informants and paid observers. She immediately transferred 2 million thrones to Lobo's account, which she had established without his knowledge or consent, and provided him with the location of the southern precinct. She also informed him that the Imperium's response would be escalating. "The Arbites may be patient, but the Administratum is not," she explained, her augmetic eyes tracking data streams visible only to her. "The destruction of one precinct fortress is a tragedy. The destruction of two suggests pattern and intent. They will send Astartes." Lobo had been examining a new weapon from Ysandra's arsenal, a plasma gun that looked unstable even by Imperial standards. He looked up at this announcement. Space Marines? The big guys in the power armor? Yes. A strike force, most likely. Small, elite, designed to eliminate high-value targets with maximum efficiency. You should leave the planet while you still can. Leave. Lady, I just got here. Besides, I got one more fortress to knock down, and you're paying me 4 million total. I ain't walking away from that kinda money. The Astartes will kill you. They'll try. Everyone tries. Ain't worked yet. Ysandra regarded him with an expression that might have been respect or might simply have been recalculation. I cannot protect you from the Adeptus Astartes. If they come, you're on your own. Wouldn't have it any other way. Now, this southern precinct, what am I looking at? The southern precinct was smaller than the northern fortress, but significantly better defended. It occupied a mesa overlooking the southern wastelands, its position providing clear sightlines in every direction. The approaches were mined. The defensive positions were reinforced. The garrison was larger, nearly 400 Arbites, and they had been put on high alert after the northern precinct's destruction. Lobo didn't care. He approached in broad daylight, driving a cargo hauler loaded with Wysandra's most destructive ordnance directly up the main access road. The Arbites saw him coming from 10 kilometers out. They activated every defensive system, deployed their entire garrison to defensive positions, and called for immediate reinforcement from off-world. The reinforcements would take 6 hours to arrive. Lobo would be done in 2. The minefield detonated as he drove through it, the explosions lifting the hauler off the ground and flipping it end over end. Lobo was thrown clear, his body tumbling through a sequence of explosions that should have reduced him to a fine pink mist. He hit the ground hard, stood up, brushed burning chemical residue off his shoulders, and kept walking. The Arbites opened fire with everything they had: heavy bolters, lascanons, missile batteries. The combined firepower was overwhelming, designed to stop an armored assault. Lobo walked through it, his body absorbing and regenerating from damage faster than they could inflict it. He reached the base of the mesa and started climbing. The mesa's face was sheer stone, 300 meters of vertical cliff. The Arbites poured fire down from above, raining explosives and las beams on the climbing figure. Lobo climbed hand over hand, his fingers digging into solid rock, pulling himself upward with mechanical determination. When the rock face exploded beneath him, he simply found new handholds and continued. He reached the top in 8 minutes. The Arbites were waiting in prepared positions, riot shields locked in a wall, shotguns aimed through the gaps. Behind them, heavier weapons stood ready to pour sustained fire into anything that made it over the cliff edge. It was a perfect defensive position, textbook deployment that would have stopped any conventional assault. Lobo crested the edge and threw himself into their formation like a missile. The impact scattered the shield wall. Arbites stumbled and fell. Lobo grabbed a riot shield, ripped it from its owner's grip, and started using it as a weapon, swinging the heavy plasteel in wide arcs that crushed armor and broke bones. Shotguns discharged at point-blank range, the impacts punching through his torso and out his back. He ignored them, discarded the bent shield, and grabbed the nearest Arbites. What followed was systematic and terrible. Lobo worked through the defensive positions with the efficiency of a killing machine, his regeneration rendering their weapons useless, his strength turning their armor into death traps. He grabbed Arbites by their helmets and crushed skulls. He tore limbs from sockets. He used bodies as clubs and shields as projectiles. The Arbites fought with absolute discipline, but discipline meant nothing against an enemy that couldn't be killed. They fell back in good order, establishing new defensive lines, calling for concentrated fire. Lobo broke through each line, leaving bodies in his wake. The mesa top became a slaughterhouse. The precinct marshal, a woman named Devera Kane, who had served the Arbites for 40 years, watched the carnage from the precinct's command bunker. She had faced riots, Xenos incursions, and heretic uprisings. She had never retreated. But as she watched this pale figure tear through her forces with the inevitability of a natural disaster, she made a decision. She activated the precinct's self-destruct protocol. Fail-safes demanded confirmation. She provided it. The cogitator asked if she was certain. She was. Deep beneath the precinct, demolition charges that had been installed during the structure's original construction began their activation sequence. The precinct had 10 minutes before total detonation. Marshal Kane opened the precinct-wide Vox channel. All personnel, evacuation order Alpha Terminus. The precinct is lost. Proceed to emergency extraction points. Move now. The surviving Arbites began a fighting retreat toward the shuttle pads, maintaining discipline even in withdrawal. Lobo watched them go, considered pursuing, then shrugged. Let them run. He was here for the precinct, not individual cops. He entered the main structure and began his descent toward the command bunker. The precinct was built like a fortress, every corridor a defensible position, every door reinforced. Lobo didn't bother with subtlety. He melted doors with melter charges, blew through walls with crack grenades, and simply walked through obstacles that would have stopped anyone else. He found Marshal Kane in the command bunker, standing alone before the main tactical display. She had removed her helmet, revealing a face lined with age and scarring. She held a bolt pistol at her side but made no move to raise it. "You are the one they call Lobo," she stated. "That's me. You have killed over 300 of my officers across 2 precincts. You have destroyed Imperial property valued at millions of thrones. You have been declared excommunicate extremis, and the penalty for that crime is death." "Yeah," I heard.